Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. Today I'm joined by the founder of social impact business Right to Dream and former Manchester United talent scout for Africa, Tom Vernon. Tom, you are an amazing change maker and social entrepreneur. You started Right to Dream in 1999 with the aim of improving the life chances of children in Ghana through football and education. But your entrepreneurial approach and different way of thinking turned Football Academies on their head and put social purpose before profits. You've said, I want to prove that development can be done differently, and I want to produce enough graduates who come out thinking, talking, acting differently for people to say, yeah, this is a new way that things could be done. So my big ambition is to change the game in a positive way. Tom, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks. It's a privilege to be here, and I hope you know that it's equally inspiring for me to be here, and everything that you've done and Made by Dyslexia has done has been a super important part of my journey with Right to Dream, but also as a dad, bringing my kids up. It's really helped with my life as well. So it's a privilege for me to be here.
Oh, thank you. That's so wonderful to hear that we're having that impact. Tom, Right to Dream is an incredible organisation. Can we start by you telling us a little bit more about it, explaining what it does and the real social purpose behind it, because it's truly inspiring.
We've come a long way from where we started. I'm sure we'll get into it, but today Right to Dream is a fully residential, fully educational, 100% scholarship football academic academy. And we have academies in Ghana, in Egypt. We're just building in San Diego now, and in Denmark as well, where we have a slightly hybrid model in Denmark. We built a model for football and academic development that is quite different to how the sort of normal football industry operates. And so we have a lot of sort of core tenets that are different to how the rest of the industry works. So every child that comes into our academy gets a 5-year scholarship to be in the academy. We strategically admit, we like to say, kids who we believe can play in the Champions League one day, or kids who we believe can study in the Ivy League one day. And so across Ghana, Ivory Coast, Egypt, now America, Mexico, and Scandinavia, we scout for kids who have tremendous football ability and great academic ability, boys and girls, and they come residentially into our academies. And then we build and structure the right pathway for every one of our kids. So the football industry is often criticized for the commoditization of children, and once you're not good enough, then you're out and the next one's in. And we took a very different approach, which was to treat every child as if they were our own and make decisions for the long term for every child. And one of the things that's transpired from that is that in elite football, we, one of the most successful in the world now at producing world-class players, both men and women, and have had, over 100 professional footballers come through our academies. And at the last World Cup saw 7 or 8 of our players playing at the World Cup. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey where we've made some sort of key decisions and choices to move away from sort of standard industry norms in how football's operated to create something that, as you kindly said, we think is quite special.
Yeah, it is completely special. It's amazing to hear the numbers of footballers that you've had in those massive tournaments and success stories. So where do you think your drive comes from to change the world? Do you think that's part of your dyslexic thinking?
I think so. I think that you're able to analyze and see problems differently, but then also see possibilities in a different way as well. And the football industry, is like many industries, is so entrenched in one way of doing things, and so the bravery to say, hey, what about if we did it really differently is not necessarily easy to come by. And then also the ideas about how could it be different are also hard to come by. And so I was very lucky when I started the academy, and when I started, I had the idea, because I knew what the academy was like at Manchester United and at other places, to kind of try and replicate something like that in Ghana. And an early mentor and my biggest role model is a man called George Weah, who's the only person ever to win the Ballon d'Or and then become president of their country. And very early on, he used to come and visit Right to Dream, and he asked me what I was trying to do. And I explained that I was trying to sort of build a standard football academy in Ghana, replicating a lot of the industry norms. And he said, well, you're going to fail. And I said, why? He said, because then you're not here for Ghana, you're here for yourself, and you're here for a sort of extractive, exploitative industry. And he said, you need to think differently if you want to be successful here. And so that was the provocation to imagine differently, and sort of the inspiration for me to be the best version of myself. And so that's where we asked ourselves, okay, if we were really here for Ghana rather than sort of myself or standard industry, what would it look like? And that's where we said, well, we shouldn't just go to a village or a community and scout for the best footballer. Why don't we find the most intelligent kid who's good at football, who could, get a scholarship to a world-leading university? And can we really go to a community and only look for boys? If we're here for Ghana, shouldn't we look for girls as well? Which is why we have, 2 residential academies in Africa that I think are the only 2 in the world for girls. So he kind of sort of unlocked the floodgate of allowing me to think the way that...
Think differently.
Yeah, that I'm capable of. And so we sort of backed those ideas, and we called an elite football academy Right to Dream as well. And I always remember in the early days, we used to go and play these, some of the best tournaments in the world and be sort of insecure about our name because it was Real Madrid and Manchester United and Chelsea, and then what's Right to Dream? And we stuck with those ideas as well, that we could tell a different story and have a different brand and then a very different approach. So I'm 100% positive that without being dyslexic, we wouldn't have been able to see the problem or kind of create a different solution.
Yeah, well, you've just described 3 of the dyslexic thinking skills that make great entrepreneurs: thinking differently, looking different ways of solving problems, and imagining an amazing solution to problems, being passionate and curious, exploring, dyslexic thinking skill, exploring, and then keeping it simple, and great communicating as well, selling your vision. So they're all wrapped in there. And tell me, why Ghana?
My educational journey wasn't particularly glittering, and so by 19 I was sort of out of education and not really welcome back, and so I had this discussion with my mum, and she was like, what are you going to do? I said, I think I'm just going to join the army. And my parents were not keen on that, and I'd done my coaching badges, so that was my other thing, but I didn't know how to get into football. And my dad knew a couple of people in Ghana from his job, and so he, I think, sort of out of desperation, called them and said, do you have any football contacts? And the friend said yes, he did, and introduced me to a club there. And I went for 3 months to go and coach in this football club, and it was a big club that had a big name in Ghana, and so some of the kids in the area knew who I was, and through a few circumstances, they sort of said, why don't you start a football team in the afternoons for the kids in the area? The kids asked me to do it, and so I did it, and I loved it. And so we had this under-12 team, and it was great fun, and I had no cares. But as I got connected with the kids' lives, then me and my girlfriend, now my wife, decided that we were going to move this team into our house. And so we moved this team of 16 boys into our house. We turned our living room into a classroom, our spare bedrooms into dormitories. And that was the start of the academy. And so we were, my wife was working at an American school. And so her salary and then my Man United salary was everything that was sustaining the the academy, but I was sort of feeling that was my direction rather than becoming a top professional coach, which was maybe one of the earlier ideas. And so we started from scratch like that, and we kind of, ground away day after day, and then took various steps to grow the academy as it has in Ghana, and now we've grown around the world as well.
It must be an incredibly proud feeling for you, knowing that you've started from literally nothing, using your own salary to turn it into what it is today.
I think it's a fairly kind of normal story that you start like that and you have all the trials and tribulations, and with the exception of what you do, people don't pull out the strand of dyslexia being a common theme along so many of those journeys, with the ability to work that hard and then to think as creatively. So it is, and then the funny thing, people often say, like, did you imagine it would get this big as having MLS clubs and our club in Denmark, which is challenging to win the league and try and qualify for the Champions League. And people asked you, do you always think that was possible? And I asked my wife, because I don't have a great memory, and she kind of says that I always did, and that's the big thinking part of it. And I can't ever really remember what I was thinking. I wish I'd written more down. And it wasn't sort of the social media age where you were trying to build your brand and capture all the capture everything. But I think I always thought really, really big, and that in many ways was quite ridiculous, because this was a under 12 football team in a suburb of Accra, and I just saw so much potential in the kids and in the idea. And I would invite people, and we were training on a dust pitch, and I couldn't even afford a full set of kits, and no one else saw it to be remarkable, but I saw it to be this like totally remarkable thing with so much potential. So that's definitely a gift to to have seen something that was fundamentally pretty basic and simple in such a way.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece of advice in there, is for any entrepreneur to actually track your story, write down your vision at the start. I know certainly for my journey with Made by Dyslexia and the campaigning I was doing before, I never really sort of wrote anything down and said, this is where I want to aim. So I think it's really important for people to do that, because looking back, it's inspiring for you, but inspiring for others.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure that I'll build some other things in future with the things that I've learned. And so it's I do quite a lot of reading around sort of second time founders now, and the lessons you learn from first time round. So I'll definitely be doing that next time.
So you've had a big change recently, haven't you? You've gone from being CEO to stepping back a little bit, and now being chair or vice chair, I think. How is that for, you've been at Right to Dream for such a long time. How does it feel to have stepped back?
Well, I think one of the things I love about what Richard Branson always says is, like, do the things that you're really good at and delegate the things that you're rubbish at. And there's also quite a lot of research that shows that the optimal size of an organization or a village or a tribe is 150. And beyond that, you start to get many of these challenges. And I think by the time we're fully operational in San Diego on the payroll across the group, from players through to staff, we'll have about 1,000 people in 5 geographies. And so the pure operational rigor and demands of running something that size is not something that I have ever trained for or have the skill set or the enjoyment to do. I think I was sort of felt like I should stay in that position because I'm the founder. And then it's when you hear Richard talk about some of that stuff where you're like, actually, let me stay in my lane and do the things that I'm good at. And so the new CEO is a long-term friend of mine who's backed the academy for a long time in multiple different ways. And so for me, it was definitely a smart move in terms of doing the stuff that I'm best at. But at the same time, like starting from where we were to where we've got to is a daily, like inch by inch grind for 25 years. And I haven't really thought about anything else, and certainly put my own sort of physical health and then my family in second place behind that. And I'm lucky to have started young, so I'm only 45. And so having a sort of second chapter where you can try and redress some of that balance is a big privilege and a big gift as well. So it was a tough decision, but I think the right one.
Yeah, I think when it's time to move on to create something new, don't you? And I'm excited to see what you'll do next. With your graduates, what's amazing is that some of them go on to top flight football, others go on to American universities and Ivy League universities. That must have an incredible transformation for the lives of the kids that you're working with in Ghana. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's totally transformational, and something that everybody would aspire to for their own kids. And so it's amazing in some of the environments that we work in to achieve that, but also in Denmark. And when we bought the club in Denmark, which we were the first sort of African academy to buy a professional football club in Europe, we kind of had the thought, I think, in our sort of subconscious, that kids in Denmark wouldn't need as much as we sort of provide in Ghana or Egypt. And what I realized is that while there's some sort of material disadvantage in certain parts of Africa, sort of often like culturally in Africa, they're so blessed with the cultures that underpin societies there, that I think a lot of our kids in Ghana and Egypt are culturally richer than some of our kids in Western countries. Now we're going, to California as well. And so I think that the impact that the academy makes is more visible for the materially disadvantaged, because it seems so obvious that you need the boots, or you need the grass pitch, or you need the pathway to go to Stanford University. But I think that some of our kids in our Western or developed world environments are less advantaged in a lot of ways. I employed a head of brand a few years ago, and he came from Nike, and he said to me, "What are we going to do about the global mental health crisis?" And I said, "Well, I don't think there is one." And he said, "Well, I've seen all the data because I was at Nike, and there is." And I said, "Go and see where the data was sourced from." And he came back and said, "It's mainly sourced from our key cities, which all happen to be in the developed world." And I said, "Go to Ghana and hang out with our girls there, and hang out with the kids there, and tell me if you feel that we have a problem there in that regard." He came back and said, "No, you don't have a problem in Ghana with those things." And so every kid has some kind of blockers to reaching their potential, and that's like our big passion. And it's been a big learning for me to understand that really is universal, rather than a kind of narrow mindset that kids who appear materially disadvantaged are the ones who need the biggest sort of help or support. Is not true, I've found.
It's so interesting and just so inspiring. Let me take you back to your childhood and education now. When did you discover you were dyslexic?
Well, I called my mum last night because I needed to get the facts straight on this. And when I was 10, that was 1988. It was kind of semi-identified in that I was really struggling at school in the classroom, and mum had a friend in the playground who had similar problems. And so she was a little bit like you, had kind of taken it on herself to go further. So she trained herself and was sort of learning about dyslexia. For me, it was terrible because she was running a before school for dyslexic kids. So I had to go to school an hour earlier than everybody else. And so as soon as that was like explained to me, dyslexia was the worst possible thing, because it was like school on top of school. So, it was all like with good intention, but for me, it just disengaged me even more because it was
Extra school.
More school. When I was 10, I was running 2 businesses, and But all that happened was I got
Told off.
trouble with teachers and at home for having bad grades or being, the dominant word through my entire educational journey was lazy. And I sent you some of my school reports previously, and it was just like littered through the whole thing that I'm lazy and I'm disengaged and I don't want to try. But at the same time, I was, running a couple of businesses, and no one even said, "Oh, that could be."
So what
something.
were your businesses doing?
So my first one was I recorded the school plays and then sold the tapes to the to all the mums, and it was a good little business actually. And then my second was like a pay to play five-a-side soccer model, because there was always like fights in the playground about who was playing against who on what teams, and so I organised a league, and every kid would pay 50p to be part of the league, and then playtime was much more structured because there was a process to this. And so it was only like 5 years ago when I reflected on it, and I was like, I don't see any other 10-year-olds that are starting businesses and thinking in that way. And then I got kind of really frustrated, and as part of my passion is like, why isn't that being identified, and why wasn't I just pushed off on that track? And then you go like 9 years down the road, and I was so close to joining the army, where I would have been a complete disaster because conformity is like not my thing, and so the army would have been a really bad fit. And if someone had said to me at 10, like, you know what, that could be something for you, even if it hadn't come with a dyslexia diagnosis, but someone had just said, maybe you should be an entrepreneur, or maybe you should be a businessman because that's, what you're doing is really good. That could have ignited that passion in me. But all I got was, your maths is rubbish and you can't spell, and you need to spend more time memorizing your times tables and learning your spellings than you do on that stuff.
And yet there was the right to dream starting right there. That's incredible.
Well, that's been the passion, is kind of misdiagnosis of potential, and that's what I think is or a lack of diagnosis of potential, and that's kind of what I see in the next chapter, because there's so that identification of every child's individual potential across the world is so poorly done, and we're still using exam results as the key diagnosis of that, or athletic performance, and it's only a very small section of kids who at a young age can sort of test towards the top of some of those disciplines, and if you don't test towards the top of them, then you're into the sort of mainstream, no real plan for you, which was absolutely me. I was at the bottom of that, and then managed to create something special, and so I see in like all the kids in Right to Dream are more talented than me and have got more potential than me, and then we fight to unlock that potential. But I think that needs to be scaled much more than on something relatively small like Right to Dream.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about how we can work together around dyslexia, but certainly that sounds like a very, very, very big ambition, and probably this is where you're going to put your focus next, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. That's my passion. I was introduced to this idea of Ubuntu, which Desmond Tutu kind of really took to the world. It's very hard to define. One of the definitions is I am because you are. I think growing up as I did, there was more of a thing as a white middle class English guy that you are because I am, and we kind of had that privilege. And a lot of my unlearning and relearning was to realize how much we need relation with other people on a totally equal level without these sort of perceived power dynamics. And so what the kids who've come through Right to Dream have done for my life and my happiness and my understanding is unquantifiable, and it's more than I've done for them. And so I'm interested in how I can kind of experience that more and deepen my understanding of that.
I think it's going to be fascinating when you get that business up and running. Let me ask you a question. We were talking about your school days. What do you think your 7-year-old or 10-year-old self would think about where you are now?
Well, I was like a football nut, and so I would have been at 10 so delighted to be in football and around football and to know footballers, and all the guys that I watched on telly then. I've met them and know them, and many of them are my friends. But I'm quite disillusioned with where the football industry at the elite level is. And so in some ways I've kind of fallen out of love with many of the elements of football. I think that there's a lot of like fundamental structural issues that are really hurting the game. But at 10 I would have been like over the moon just to be in football. I didn't think that was possible.
And that entrepreneur in you at 10 years old, do you think he'd be proud of what you're doing?
Yeah, I can't remember if I thought I had it in me. I don't think I did. I think the narrative around my lack of academic success was the dominant narrative. So I don't think I would. And sometimes when I track people down on social media from my earlier school years, everybody says you're the last guy that was going to do something like this. And then also, like, globalization hadn't really happened. So if you'd said that the organization you founded is going to be in Accra, Cairo, Farum, Copenhagen, San Diego, New York, that was not a normal thing. One of my early football memories was the 1990 World Cup, where Cameroon had a great World Cup and nearly knocked England out. I remember thinking, like, where the hell's Cameroon? And like have no idea. And so, to know Africa as well as I do, and to have travelled as much of that, that just wasn't on the cards. Whereas I think kids see themselves as global citizens more these days. That was never on the cards for me.
You talk about your disillusionment around football. And I know that's something that you're really trying to challenge and conquer and change with Right to Dream. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, disillusionment definitely with professional football. I think a lot of the grassroots stuff is fantastic. I mentioned George Weah before, who is the only African to win Ballon d'Or and then become president of his country. And he used his fame, wealth, influence as a footballer to then run presidential campaign because he cared so much about what could be done in Liberia. So that was like the big influence for me. It also gives a different slant on like what's our education about at the academy, because we want to educate our kids on what impact could you imagine and how could you have that impact. So that makes education, I think, a lot more interesting, because you can read the books that you want according to your passion. And if I use one anecdotal example, we have a professional footballer in Europe from the academy who, the first time he came to Europe, couldn't believe that there was no litter on the streets as compared to where he's from. And so his passion became recycling and cleaning up his city, which is not on our agenda or particularly strong part of Right to Dream ethos around sort of climate change or sustainability. It's not really our space, but that became his passion, and then he leveraged his education and our network, and now he's investing in that space and spends his time off the pitch doing that. So we create that framework, using George Weah as the icon to say he used football for the next thing. To say right from the start, football, whether it be at Stanford or whether it be playing in the Premier League, is going to give you so many privileges and opportunities and a voice. And often you hear professional footballers saying, like, I never wanted to be a role model, I just wanted to be a footballer. That's a failure in the academy system and in the education to say, you are going to be a role model, it's part of the job, so how can you do that to the best of your abilities? And LeBron James, Marcus Rashford have been great global examples of what good can look like in that space.
My last question for you is, if you had one piece of advice for dyslexics, young or old, what would that be?
I have a friend who, he's not dyslexic, but he thinks his son is. And he said something really simple to me which I really like, was if your kid's a gondola, make sure that you live in Venice, and if your kid's a Ferrari, live in Germany on the autobahns. And I really liked it as a way of thinking, like, you can't compare a gondola ride in Venice to driving a Ferrari on the autobahn. They're just two different things. And so it's about finding the environment that is right for you. And I think that's, I try to live by that and look at that with my own kids as well, and kids that come into the academies, is just find the right environment for yourself. And if you're a gondola, you're never going to be a Ferrari. So don't worry about it, because Venice is beautiful. And if you are the other way around, like a gondola on the autobahns, is going to be a waste of time as well. So that's my friend Kwamina in Ghana who came up with that one. So I think it's quite useful and quite simple.
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic story. Thank you so much. It's been really inspiring speaking to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Their free tool, Immersive Reader, helps every dyslexic with reading and comprehension. Find out more by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. And if you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.